So getting a bit ahead, let's take a step back. I'm 26 years old. After a heartbreak in Chicago, born and raised in the cornfields of Northern Illinois, went to university in Chicago, first true relationship, and heartbroken. Didn't know how to observe, how to deal with it. And the only logical piece was getting rid of all my worldly possessions and booking a one-way ticket to Colorado to begin planes, trains, automobiles, and hitchhiking across the West.
Of course.
Of course, with one book in my pack, which is Jack Kerouac's
I was
On the
about
Road.
to ask you if it was
Yeah.
on the road.
And it was a moment that was one of the most confronting moments on the path because I was not well. I had been holding back. I wasn't telling anybody. I was going to the bathroom about 20 times a day. I was losing weight rapidly. My stools were completely blood, and there was something really off. However, I had cast everything to the wind. I had no home place, mid-20s in this space of really self-reliance in a very elementary, immature way. She hands me a pamphlet that says, "You and Crohn's and or ulcerative colitis like to prescribe medication. 6 to 12 pills a day to start as a 26-year-old. The other option was surgery. And what they shared was with the extension of how far ulcerative colitis had gone through my colon, that they would have to remove my entire colon, which would have left me 26 with a colostomy bag. I received the pamphlet from her. Again, this doctor didn't look me in the eye once. I have the language now, but I didn't have the language then for what I'm about to share. There was a energy within me. Call it spirit, source, guides, higher self, whatever language each of us, whoever's listening to this, wants to put into it. And it said, leave. And I felt in my head, I was like, I have already all these tests run. What more tests do you need? It didn't feel right. And so I left, and I never went back. And 13 years later, I can say I do not associate with the diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. I no longer have what the Western medical system calls a chronic disease.
Welcome to Miraculous Transformations, conversations about powerful practices that create powerful transformations. Join me as I delve into stories of change and explore the tools and practices that have helped people navigate their paths. You might just find some you'd like to try yourself. First, I would like to welcome you, Jamie, to Miraculous Transformations. Thank you so much for joining me. And will you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie, for having me on this magical show. My name is Jamie Lightheart, Jamie Finnan, William James, different names in different circles, coming in from the redwoods of Northern California, and really excited to drop in, the dear sister, and share some story about transformation and change and perspective shift.
Well, I am excited to hear what you have to share. So, just a little background, Jamie and I know each other through some mutual friends. Some of our, I think both of our favorite people on the planet, Tiffany and Bryce. We got to meet at their wedding a couple years ago and just immediately identified as soul family and, have crossed paths randomly all over the place. Have lived briefly in Sedona at the same time and have crisscrossed in California, and even we're in England at the same time, even though we didn't see each other, but we were very close. And so it's just been fun to, I think, follow each other's paths and connect, David and I to connect with you every seems like every couple months or so and hear how your path is unfolding. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to share today. So why don't we jump in?
Lovely. Sounds great. So with the curiosities that you had, right before we got on the phone, part of the frame that you had was health and wellness. So you've been curious about one aspect of my life. And what aspect has that been?
Well, so one of the things that I'm really have been super fascinated hearing you talk about is your journey with ulcerative colitis.
Mhm.
And, I've heard you talk about it in different contexts and just the journey all together. I think you just mentioned it's been 13 years now.
Mhm.
And so lots of wisdom to has been gained and lots of experience. And one of the things that I just feel really passionate about is this idea of self-healing. And I think sometimes it can come off as me feeling skeptical or critical of the medical system. And while I do have that piece, I also recognize that there is a time and a place, and that the Western medical system is wonderful for many things.
Mhm.
But it is not a healing system. It is a system that is set up to treat symptoms or to fix broken bones and things like that, which it does very, very well. But when it comes to root cause of things, and when it comes to understanding the origin of a condition, and what are some things that you can do that are not just taking a pill that can fix these things, what are some lifestyle things, or what are some natural remedies, what are some social, I mean, some emotional connections. I just don't think that our system, our allopathic medical system, is set up for that. And so my journey as a mindfulness into mindfulness and meditation, and as a mindfulness and meditation instructor, has really opened up this mind, body, soul connection. And so I love to hear stories of people who have that realization and do like amazing things with it. And so that's one of the things that really draws me to your story.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. And root cause. When I hear you say root cause, there's so many different weavings of how this story has unfolded for me. And ulcerative colitis, something that most people may or may not have heard. A lot of people have heard of Crohn's, which is an inflammatory disease of the colon. And most documentation in the Western world puts their hands up in the air and says, I don't know what caused this. It's just another disease that we don't know what caused it, which is why it's designated as chronic, meaning there's no cure for it. So, getting a bit ahead, let's take a step back. I'm 26 years old. After a heartbreak in Chicago, born and raised in the cornfields of Northern Illinois, went to university in Chicago, first true relationship, and heartbroken. Didn't know how to observe, how to deal with it. And the only logical piece was getting rid of all my worldly possessions and booking a one-way ticket to Colorado to begin planes, trains, automobiles, and hitchhiking across the West.
Of course.
Of course, with one book in my pack, which is Jack Kerouac's
I was
On the
about
Road.
to ask you if it was
Yeah,
on the road.
one on the road was the only book there. And it was of fairy tales and storybooks. I'm 26, again, planes, trains, automobiles, hitchhiking through Utah, first time through Oregon, which later would house me. Same with Washington State. And then after about 6 months, I landed in Northern California. Not too far from where I'm at right now, actually. All
Okay.
these synchronicities and spirit weaving. A place called Willow Creek, California. And it was a moment that was one of the most confronting moments on the path because I was not well. I had been holding back. I wasn't telling anybody. I was going to the bathroom about 20 times a day. I was losing weight rapidly. My stools were completely blood, and there was something really off. However, I had cast everything to the wind. I had no home place, mid 20s in this space of really self reliance in a very elementary, immature way, meaning I didn't have a solid foundation for myself. And I also didn't have the communication skills to enroll other people in what my lived experience was in that moment. I was down to, at that point, down to about 125 pounds. But I
Wow.
had this big, gnarly beard. And so you couldn't really tell if I didn't have my shirt off. And a home base was kind of Colorado and Boulder at that moment. So I went back there and I was starting to get in a really bad way. And the last place I wanted to go to was the Midwest. And I had one like ticket and a half left of miles. And so I went back to the Midwest and landed on my parents' doorstep and I collapsed. I literally, my body collapsed. I had been holding myself up on the road for so long, which is a metaphor for a lot of us. We've been holding ourselves up for so long. And then there comes that final breaking moment or we
Mm.
come to a space where we feel safe enough to fully let all of the protection down. And I would spend the next 3 months in and out of the hospital. Stool samples, CT scans, you name it, blood work, from here to the moon. I went from jumping off of waterfalls in Tahoe to looking up at a hospital ceiling. At this point now, I was down to about 115 pounds. I was malnourished, I was dehydrated, and I had no answers. And I knew the Midwest wasn't going to be a place where I was to heal, whatever this was. And I had a buddy in Seattle from college in Chicago, and he's like, "Hey man, just bought my house. Let's worry about rent. When you worry about it, get back on your feet." And so, against my doctor's wishes, because I didn't have an answer yet, and my family, everybody was like, we don't even know what's wrong with you." I booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, and heartbroken, financially broke, January 3rd, the middle of winter, to
Ooh,
move
yeah.
into a buddy's basement with no windows, which is northwest in the winter. It's pretty gloom, pretty dark night of the soul kind of entrance. I flew to Seattle, and when I landed in Seattle, I had a voicemail from the doctor in Chicago saying, "You have ulcerative colitis. We'd like you to come in for more tests and give you a plan for what's to come next." So I booked a C-list gastroenterologist, which took me 3 months in Seattle. An A-list, a top tier, was 6 months out. And so I started researching what little information there was out there on ulcerative colitis, was watching these YouTube videos of people who had not left their home in years, who didn't go out to eat, who didn't know what was going on, and were very shameful and really bleak outlook on life. And so at this point, I started intuitively eliminating things. Being a nerd on research, I was studying our food system, nutrition, and immediately gluten, dairy, wheat, fat, fiber, nuts, anything I couldn't pronounce. I thought of food as the first piece. And when I had my doctor's appointment, I'd already started feeling a little better. But when I entered that hospital and I sit across the table and an observantly unhealthy doctor,
Mm.
overweight, I could tell she was a smoker. And mind you, I'm 26 years old, being in what's perceived as the prime of physical health life. And before this, I was active, an athlete, fit, all these pieces. And a doctor doesn't look at me in the eyes once. And she says, "You have ulcerative colitis. It's in the same family as Crohn's, different part of your digestive system." She hands me a pamphlet that says, "You and Crohn's and or ulcerative colitis. Like to prescribe medication. 6 to 12 pills a day to start." As a
Oh,
26-year-old. And she says, 1 in 3 people have symptoms worse than the side effects you're experiencing. My side effects were deep stabbing in my lower right abdomen. It was in my ascending colon, which was most of
these
the
were your
trajectory.
side effects from drugs you were already taking or
No, I was
symptoms?
on no drugs.
Okay,
Yeah,
so these were your
this is
symptoms.
just me coming in. The side effects of the symptoms of just ulcerative colitis:
Gotcha. Okay.
dehydrated, malnourished. My body wasn't absorbing any nutrients that I was putting in because
Mm.
of the damage to my colon. And the aspect of normally being at 165, 70 pounds was down to 115 pounds. I could barely hold a 3-minute conversation. Walking up 3 steps, not 3 flights of steps, was taxing on me. And so when I hear 6 to 12 pills a day to start, and 1 in 3 people have symptoms worse than the side effects themselves, I was self-medicating with ganja because it was suppressing the pain and also the fetal position. So I was just literally curled up in a ball every day. The other option was surgery. And what they shared was, with the extension of how far ulcerative colitis had gone through my colon, that they would have to remove my entire colon, which would have left me 26 with a colostomy bag. Would have been real sexy going out on dates, huh? Excuse me, I gotta alleviate my shit bag. And the
Oh,
truth was, I knew so many people had been living with this for so long. I received the pamphlet from her. Again, this doctor didn't look me in the eye once. She goes, "We'd like to have some more tests run." She hands me my manila folder and tells me to go to the lab. I sat in the lab for 3 minutes. I have the language now, but I didn't have the language then for what I'm about to share. There was a energy within me. Call it spirit, source, guides, higher self, whatever language each of us, whoever's listening to this, wants to put into it. And it said, leave. And I felt in my head, I was like, I have already all these tests run. What more tests do you need? It didn't feel right. And so I left and I never went back. And 13 years later, I can say I do not associate with the diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. I no longer have what the Western medical system calls a chronic disease. And for 10 years, trial and error, trial and error. I studied our food system. I studied our industries that seemingly on the outside have our best interests in our consumer society, be it the Western medical indoctrination. And you shared it a bit ago. Our Western medical, it's not to disregard.
Right.
It's to say medical emergencies. If I'm in a car accident and I have my body is completely mangled, I want that Western. One of the beautiful pieces of being in Seattle is the influence of Eastern practitioners.
Right, like
They have
the weaving of them together. Right.
and just Eastern apothecaries. So
Mhm.
when I started researching the different like things like slippery elm bark, which is a mucus forming, you break it into a tea. And I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So 10 years later, 13 years later, I do not associate with that diagnosis. Trial and error over that time. The first approach was, okay, it's my body. So I need to approach it in a physical way. What are my inputs? What am I putting in, on, and around my body? Food, lotions, all the products, things in the air. There were pieces of that path where I went completely clean. Again, gluten-free, dairy-free, no nuts, fiber, anything I couldn't pronounce, anything that wasn't naturally occurring. I researched our food system. I found artifacts, like the only woman on the panel for the Food and Drug Association in the 80s shared with the board that if you flip the food pyramid, the one that we saw growing up through the 90s and 2000s, that in the 80s, this only woman on the board, she shared, if you flip this to have dairy, meat, and grain in higher relation than fruit and vegetables and these pieces, you have an epidemic of obesity and diabetes within 20 years. Well, we saw that within 15 years by the end of the 90s.
Mm.
And I share these pieces because all this information is readily available.
Right.
Now, the physical pieces, I also was going deep into the yoga world during this time. This is 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014.
Okay.
And in this time period, Seattle was a rebirth place for me. The apothecaries, the focus on being gluten-free and dairy-free without the shame and the guilt that I did receive from my family when I went back to the Midwest. I grew up eating a standard American diet, and I'm so grateful that I had home-cooked meals every day growing up, yet I ate a conventionally grown meat, potatoes, dairy type of lifestyle growing up. And so for the sake of this conversation, we spoke before we hit the record button on root cause. And yes, there's all the practices, strategies, tools, techniques, and concepts that were trial and error over 10 years. What I've found is the diagnosis of ulcerative colitis was a communication from spirit to see if I was willing to radically choose for myself.
Mm.
In a world that worth, value, healing, identity has been set all outside of self, this was a reclamation process. And I had to let go of everything I knew: family, place, finance, stability. I know this is completely terrifying. And I would be completely in half truths if I didn't say there were many moments, darkest nights of the soul, where I'm just in the depths of loneliness, yet feeling to stay in that dedication, a responsibility to myself, and knowing that no one's coming to save me. We live in this world that there's still that piece in other people like, well, I've prescribed and everything taking care of me, government, a supermarket, mom and dad, all these pieces outside of self, that reclamation process needed to also, I needed to remember and relearn how to let go and how to grieve and how to mourn.
Mm.
So while growing up playing in glyphosate sprayed yellow number 7 cornfields of Illinois,
Right. Oh,
growing
yeah.
up eating a standard American diet with meat, potatoes, these pieces conventionally grown, growing up in households built with drywall, growing up with Febreze and Tide in the detergents, growing up with fluoride in the water. The purpose of sharing these isn't to say, oh, these evil empires with this. It's just where we've evolved post World War II, 1950s Mayberry to create a more convenient lifestyle for people.
Right.
But in that convenience, it introduced an array of chemicals and non-organic inputs that then exasperated what the core wound was, why ulcerative colitis manifested.
So before you go into that really
Yeah.
quick, I heard recently, I'm not very good at remembering to detailed statistics, but I heard recently the number of chemicals that are in our like daily life compared to, even like 30, 40 years ago. And I mean, it's something, it's like in the thousands. I mean, it's just wild how many more chemicals are part of our daily life. So just to speak to what you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that like we're trying to say all of this stuff is bad. It's just that we're bombarding our systems, and
Mm-hmm.
the rate of adaptation that we're requiring of our systems, some of our systems are just shutting down, which is why we're seeing, I believe, the rate of disease that we see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but back to you were about to go into.
And that adaptability is the piece, because it's not that long ago that all these chemicals were introduced.
Right.
Just after the turn of the century, even after that, post World War II, when we won't get too much in the, as a history nerd, I dove in. All of this is readily available, and people can discern for themselves conspiracy or all these pieces. Yet, sovereignty, resourcing self, the body, while yes, is designed to heal, we only have seen the capability of healing because we live in a world that the collective disease is disconnection.
Mm.
Full stop. Cancers, leukemia, MS, anything you name is a disease of disconnection. And while most of our focus in humanity, especially at the turn of the century with the invent of pharmaceuticals, surgery, state-of-the-art technology that we thought was going to save us, we found that it hasn't saved us at all, because there really is no saving to be had. The truth is, the reclamation and the adaptability is one of our greatest strengths and superpowers, but we each must choose. And we also each must courageously slow down. So what this diagnosis provided was the opportunity for me to slow down in a world that says don't slow down, because when you do slow down, you're going to see. You're going to see that the world has been fabricated. You're going to see that the implementation of status quo, things as they are, is the greatest fallacy we've ever been led to believe. It's not things as they are, it's things as they've been created.
Mm.
Most people are hands up in the air. Well, that's just the way things are. I disrupt that pattern. And I had to disrupt it in my mind first. Mindset is the key ingredient for the story that I'm sharing. I recall one of the first conversations after I moved to Seattle, and my mom reflected this to me a few years ago. She said, but my family calls me Bud. She says, Bud, I was blown away and I knew you were going to be okay, even though I was terrified for you. She said, after you chose to not go with medication or surgery, you got on the phone and you were in the most challenging place in your entire life. all the things. Broke, heartbroken, in a city, didn't know anybody, living in a basement, these types of things, not the sexiest things on a resume. And she goes, you said, Mom, I'm going to come back bigger, faster, stronger, better. And that was in the depths, like where that was within me. That was, whether we call it higher self, woven conscious, unconscious, subconscious together. And after this piece, I shared diving deep into the yoga world, going so much where it would relocate me to Phoenix and open this new market for core power yoga. In that time, I found deep healing physically. Yet every so frequently, I would still have a flare up, meaning bowels would be very loose. There would be blood, these types of things. And I began to track it, that they were during very emotionally charged times.
Okay.
And once I began to track that, fast forward now, so diagnosis was in end of 2011, 2012. Seattle community, yoga world, Phoenix, opening these yoga studios. Then fast forward, leave Phoenix, leave that role, on the road again, land in Hood River, Oregon, right before the world lockdown. And this was a complete shift in most people checking out. Myself and my former partner, we went fully in.
Okay.
And before we got on the call, you also asked of different practices and what were some of the things that came in. I can speak to all the practices, tools, and strategies. If people say a tool belt, but then you acquire more and you need a vehicle with toolboxes, and then you need a tool shed, and then you need a tool barn, and then you need a whole tool warehouse. And so now I feel privileged in how I support others, connecting men and women to the path of their heart. The statistic now is something wild, like, that there's 60% of our population has a chronic disease, and even half of that has two or more. And so there's no person that's untouched by this story, whether or not you have ulcerative colitis or you have some other chronic illness that is shared. The key principle to this story is choice, that we always have a choice. In a world that tells us, we've chosen for you, don't worry about it. Just pay us the money and let us excavate your attention. This is the time of reclamation. So who's ever listening to this, you have a choice. And while the world was shutting down, I turned my gaze inward deeper. While I had already found deep healing, it took me only so far. While I do believe that my environment, my set and setting, my inputs, what went in, on, and around my physical body were a deep factor to what exasperated ulcerative colitis, it was only that. I never associated with trauma, until I started doing this deep healing work. And then when I identified my core wound as my father wound, my core father wound, I was associated with trauma as being beaten or being locked in a cage or not being fed, like things I saw in media.
Yeah, me
I
too.
didn't identify trauma as something feathered in over a lived experience, behaviors, patterns, and programs over a lifetime with authoritative figures in my life and protector figures. So when I identified my core wound as my father wound, having an emotionally unavailable father shame me over the course of my life for being a very emotional boy, that unlocked everything. I also didn't associate having a great memory. I thought maybe I just smoked a little too much weed, or I remember people were like, oh yeah, Timmy sat in the corner booth of my 7th birthday party at Pizza Hut and had a striped shirt. I'm like, did I even have a birthday? So I share these pieces and we laugh because it's true, it's real. And I correlated those two pieces because one, the memory does not discern between for elementary phrases, good and bad. Once it goes into self-protection, it masks complete timelines of our memory for us, thinking that it's protecting us. And so once I identified this core wound, 10x, 100x, memories started flooding in.
Really?
I just unlocked Then I'm a full send kind of guy, as you've taken. I go to the extreme ends of the pendulum and then go. And part of that is the sacrifice that I know I'm here to make to support others on their path, in connecting men and women to the path of their heart, reclamation of their physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being. And to fully, because we talk so much in our world of healing,
Mhm.
but most people are just trying to get to baseline.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
our divine inherent right to be in that. Our true nature is vitality.
Hmm.
Is what is the optimization of this meat suit that we get to inhabit? How beautiful, how sensuous, how magical, which of course some of us are called to go through deeper crucibles. So in identifying this core father wound, I also identified, and now as a preface, I've been through it. I've been through my anger stages and frustration stages. I now see my father as a man grown up in the Midwest with uncles and fathers who were indoctrinated, programmed, and patterned to not feel, to suppress everything, to push it down. We live in an age of uninitiated men, and I come from this line too. And so once I started identifying these, I was able to be angry and move through these pieces and then see it through acceptance and forgiveness and grace and compassion. Because I can't say I would have done anything different than my father did. He knew exactly what he knew. And that created a mother wound, which, because of their lack of communication, she over nurtured.
Oh, interesting.
My closest relationship growing up was with my mother. Thus, with women, my closest mentors until my mid-30s was all women, powerful women. I'm so grateful for this path. But it's because that over nurturing, she was overcompensating because of my father's inability to hold that emotional space. And not even that, just go cry to your mother. Boys don't cry. Toughen up. Just go be with your sisters. Those types of things.
Okay.
Dismissive. Once I identified that piece and the mother, then I identified the sibling wound. And these were things I was so resistant to. A former partner, she would say it in ways I just didn't know how to receive it because it was the most intimate piece. No, it couldn't be my family, all that, because then it was me. How was I showing up in those ways? Defensiveness, righteousness, these types of things. It's beautiful to share it in this way because now that I have reached a point of this acceptance, forgiveness, and now in the last year, after removing myself from my blood family for many years, finding a way to really be in deep communication and rather than understanding one another, be able to see one another. And so with going back to the root cause, I started unlocking memories of being an infant, holding my breath till I turned blue. And I remember it was a family joke. Each of us have these family jokes that aren't really jokes. Oh, how cute it was. You would just hold your breath until you turn blue. How, in what world is that cute? People were bringing jokes in, like most of our brothers, as I did too, wear the nice guy mask. And we crack jokes when the most serious pieces come in, when we're trying to diffuse it. I go, okay, holding my breath. As a boy into teenager, I didn't remember these things, but they would flood in. Beautiful memories too, of like how much I played with my sisters and being on the block with my friends playing flashlight tag and these types of things. An age of like living on the block in the Midwest in the 90s. It was like old school type stuff. And one of the pieces that came through too is I would go to the bathroom, but I would cross my legs and hold my poop in. I didn't remember any of this. When I started correlating this, I go, there's something that I was not looking at and I wasn't taught or trained to look at, which was the emotional intelligence suppression and the disconnection from spirit.
And that manifests in physical symptoms.
Aha. And that's it. So once I identified this piece is while the food, environment, setting, inputs on and around, that only exasperated what the initial root cause of ulcerative colitis was, which was emotional suppression and spiritual disconnection. Then everything else, my environment exasperated it. And then that last piece of heartbreak at 26, that was the piece where it was my first true long-term relationship. And that was the final piece that clicked everything into place for a perfect storm.
Right.
And for where spirit was calling me to be, it had to happen in that time before my Saturn return and all of these aspects of my constellations. So once I identified that, I went in. I started, this is when I was calling in brotherhood, because in the age of uninitiated men, I knew that what I had been told is money and success and women and sex and acquiring things were my initiations and rites of passage. But what I needed was men who were calling me forward, which our mutual friend Bryce was that first brother. I remember the first circle when I was in this process of observing that emotional intelligence that I needed to evolve and my connection with spirit, to the land, to the people from which I come from. And I thought I was going into that circle for the boy to die. But in my first men's gathering, Brother Bryce, he said, no, let's sit him next to you.
Mm.
What would you tell that 5-year-old boy? What would you tell that 10-year-old boy? Because these were the pieces of why ulcerative colitis manifested. Because I was not provided a space for my fullest expression. Each of us as children, we just want to be seen. We just want to be loved and played with. And it's not to say that I had a terrible childhood. I want to be very clear. Still a very beautiful childhood. Yet, this is a symptom of our civilization. This
I
is
think
so
that's
much larger than me.
I really appreciate that that the explanation of that, because I think one of the things that I've been teaching my students a lot lately, my young students is my child students, is about holding more than one emotion at the same time.
Uh-huh.
I think that it's really important to share that, like, even though you're having all these realizations about your child, or were having all these realizations about your childhood, it doesn't mean that all the good stuff wasn't there also.
Uh-huh.
Like, it's a this and this, not one
Mm-hmm.
or the other. And I really think that's a valuable distinction.
It's so valuable. And thanks for sharing that because so many beautiful memories came through too. And it was terrifying with what was coming through of what I didn't remember. And I just, I went in. I went in so deep. I went in so deep. And in this too was sexual energy reclamation. There's so many pieces I could speak to this, yet all of it comes with a piece, as I name of going into that circle and Bryce speaking with the little boy within me at 5, at 10, at 15, at 20. All of these pieces that in a world that said, nope, keep going forward. And if you're going to look back, just hold all the stress and the guilt and the longing and let that be shameful and these types of things, rather than seeing it as a beautiful observation of self. So for the sake of storytelling, fast forward, and I say a 10-year mark because there was a moment, and it was in the gorge, that I was exploring fasting, juice cleansing, enemas, urine therapy, paired with my redevotion and dedication. Even though I've been in the yoga world, I hadn't been fully devoted to meditation, to mindfulness practices such as chanting, journaling, presencing practices that slow us down.
Right.
For anyone listening here, all of it can be overwhelming. Yoga, meditation, journaling, presencing, cold exposure, hot exposure, fasting. How do I do that? My morning practice is now 3 hours long, and my evening practice is 4 hours long. And I need to take a week off to do all these things. There's one reason why we do all of these pieces: to presence us, to quiet the mind, and to allow the body into a space of coherence so that it can do exactly what it knows how to do intuitively, which is heal itself.
Mm.
No one else is, all these people that say I'm a healer and all these things, it's not right or wrong, but no one heals another person. Others create a space, a set and setting, provide inputs for someone, for the body to come into recalibration. But first, it needs to purify. So if somebody asks me, okay, what can I do right now? After 10 years of trial and error, all these ways, the first piece is fasting. Even before focusing on all the emotional and spiritual suppression and all these pieces, fasting,
For how
being
long?
on, that's intuitive. So some people,
Okay.
you can find someone to find protocols if that works for you. Some people are like, I need someone to tell me what to do, when to do, how to do it. My path was intuitive. I was kind of having people guide me. Again, I'm so grateful for my former partner. She brought a lot of these practices and tools in, and we shared a lot. She was healing from thyroid imbalances, chronic migraines from when she was a little girl, irregularity in her cycles. And so while she was finding harmony, I was going deep into my healing too. And so we really walked each other to a beautiful place. I'm so grateful to this woman for all of the pieces that she brought into my life. So go down these routes of cleansing. How can we purify this space rather than putting more stuff in? What we need to focus on is alleviating the densities of the mind, of the body, of the emotion, of the spirit. And this weaves into to nerding out on things like neuroplasticity, how we can literally rewire our mind and our brain, how we orient our mind to activate our heart and bring our body, our mind, our being into a state of vitality, not just survival. Most people are in survival mode. And so what's slowing down begins to regulate our nervous system, begins to bring us into a coherence of presence. And not to alleviate the mind, but to look at the pieces of worry, of angst, of stress, of all the stories we create. And they're created in a beautiful way because it's the mind attempting to make meaning. And in a world where each of us are attempting to make meaning, we've bought every diet, we've bought every house, we've bought every relationship, and we found that we're emptier and emptier, but we're also so dense and full. So the first piece on the road to forgiveness is acceptance, of being radically honest with ourselves, where we're at. And I know most people are not in a position to remove themselves from family, from place, all of these. But the most challenging piece for people purifying their life, and not to be pure, but to start removing obstacles, alcohol, pornography, tobacco, Netflix. All these things aren't inherently evil. It's just like any technology. It's how it's used, not the actual technology itself.
Totally.
And this goes back thousands of years. It's not just what we associate with technology as something that's electrical. It's a common misconception. It's like, oh, it's only something that you plug in. So 13 years later now, I do not associate with this diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. There are all of the ways that we can bring ourselves into presence and to clearly observe and witness our path and have an opportunity to share the traumas and the patterns and the programs that we consciously, unconsciously, and subconsciously have running all the time that keep us disconnected from ourselves. Again, the collective dis-ease is disconnection. And as my elder Mark shares, our original instructions are to pray for all of creation, which means we also must pray for ourselves because we are a part of all creation. And in this, reclamation is possible. I've seen the magic of healing and I've experienced it in ways that truly I felt were only going to be prayers. Now, at 39 years old, I have the strongest connection with spirit, spiritual practices, gone to this last years have been on 4 continents and 16 countries, sat at the feet of wisdom keepers and elders. I walk with different plant allies, spirit of cacao. We speak to what allowed me, the steward for me connecting to slow down. What a radical act of rebellion in the world we live in than to slow down.
I love that.
And not to rebel against something, to rebel for self-sovereignty, self-love, self-care. And this is a piece that's important for me to name because I have to take responsibility for years of amplifying self-love, radical self-care, especially for our brothers. We were not taught to invest and prioritize money, time, and resources into our self-care of our physical body, our mental states, our emotional states, and are definitely not our spiritual practices.
Right, which is why when you go to a yoga retreat, it's like mostly women
Yeah,
because men aren't paying for them.
yeah,
That's changing.
yeah, it's changing.
Yeah.
Massive changes afoot. And I speak these pieces because that reclamation process begins with choice, begins with removing the, rather observing first the victim consciousness and mindset, and knowing that we have a choice. Irregardless of how much money you make, how many babies you have, yes, it becomes more challenging with the different responsibilities we have in life.
Right.
We all can't just pack our bags and hit the road, but we can in certain ways. We can start to look clearly at where our life is and how we're engaged with our own life. And back to the piece of responsibility, radical self-love and self-care. What I found in travels, producing events, holding space one-on-one for people, carrying the medicine of cacao, it wasn't so much that people didn't love themselves. It's that most people didn't like themselves.
Hmm.
In fact, a majority of people hate themselves.
Oh,
And the truth is to look at this and to see how beautiful it is, because it's feedback. Everything is communicating with us. If we remove ourselves, if I remove myself from victim that this is happening to me and this is happening for me, and it's not to bypass ourselves, it's to say, okay, if I have this headache, the brain actually feels no pain at all. So if anyone has a headache, it's associated with something else in the body. Most of the times it's dehydration or other things like that. So it's body communicating with us in its brilliance that something is out of balance. And we need to bring harmony and coherence into this space. And so, in a world where we've been sold outside of self value, worth, identity, of course, we've been sold outside of self healing in the
right.
Western medical system. And in that is our greatest act of rebellion is to reclaim all of that. And so, of course, self love and self care is going to be very dismissed by the masses because it can be seen as woo woo, or that's selfish, or, oh, how dare you choose to take time for yourself? You have 3 children over here. There's so much power reclamation when when one chooses to slow down, to feel everything, and begin to identify the pieces that aren't in resonant field with the natural cycles of our world.
Hmm.
We go through death and life, rebirth, each of these. Yes.
Oh no, I was just agreeing. Well, I will say though, I'll just interject here.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been talking about, I said this to my mom the other day, and she was like, have you put this on your website? Are you making this your mission statement?" And I haven't, but I when I went into, I should say I haven't yet, but when I went into meditation and mindfulness, like training to be a meditation teacher, my true like baseline thing is that I feel that meditation is a portal to a a more peaceful world, a better world, a more connected world. And I feel like I want as many people in the world meditating as possible, because you get to a certain point where you hit a tipping point and then you've got a momentum where these things become the standard in conversation and they become, the natural course. And I feel like what you're speaking to is kind of what I'm speaking to, which when you're talking about slowing down, that is what meditation allows you to do,
Hmm.
is slow down and observe and learn to be okay with
Hmm.
what you're seeing and with uncertainty and with questioning and with the uncomfortable feelings and riding the wave of the uncomfortable emotions and all of those things. And it's not meant to be an escape from them. It's meant to be a way to slow down and pause and
Hmm.
look at all of them.
Hmm. Yeah, completely agree. And most people say, oh, I can't meditate. I can't meditate. And the truth is that there's such substantiated evidence that most people believe that they can't
Mhm.
because they haven't been shown. And so what we're speaking to is belief of what's
Right.
possible, whether you faith, belief, aside from all the religious dogmatic. I didn't have this language and tools. Everything that you hear me speak of connection with spirit and our allies, dropping deep into the woven tapestry of consciousness. Like I hold myself to not go too into the mystic poetry in this so that it can be more digestible for a wider swath of people. And the truth is, our connection with the divine, with spirit, meditation is our clearest access point to the collective consciousness. And we've been programmed and taught and indoctrinated that this is not something we have access to. It doesn't exist because it can't be shown to us. We have to choose to slow
Mhm.
down. And when we each courageously choose, it's what's the saying, is it the Dalai Lama or the Buddha something, is if you can't meditate, if you don't have 5 minutes to meditate, meditate for 10 minutes. If you don't have 30 minutes to meditate, meditate for an hour. Like these
It's
type.
it's a Zen proverb, I believe.
Yes.
I made a
Yeah.
video about it, and it's like meditate every day for meditate every day for 20 minutes. Unless you don't have time, then you should meditate for an hour.
Right. Yeah. And that's the piece. And people are like, oh, I don't have time. And you're like, you're right. Nobody has time. Time is also a construct. So then we look at the constructs for which we live in. And lifting the veils, I have to, again, hold myself in responsibility because what you're speaking to in meditation is that meditation is a process and a technology for us to lift the veils, to truly see for each of us what this lived experience as spirit incarnated in this avatar, in this form is. And when these veils are lifted, it is so confronting for everyone. No one is exempt from this.
Right.
Just like when I accessed those memory points, I was lifting veils that my mind had attempted to protect me from accessing parts of my heart that were feeling it. So now the mind is attempting to think for the heart, and the mind can't do that. The mind must be open and allow the release of control,
Mhm.
which is very challenging for our collective because we've been told that we can control it. We dominate over nature, and that's what we do as humankind. That's not our original instructions. My elder Mark
It
shows
also doesn't work.
it
Sorry.
doesn't work. We see that. He says, what's the better question? What is the better question here? And when we go into our meditations and we go into our presencing practices and we go into nature and we walk and we go and we just be with a child, just be with a child or an animal, or we watch a sunset, we feel our connection to all. Nobody needs to go to a meditation retreat to know that. Every person has practices right now. There's just an unawareness that they're in process because they don't have the language to share with other people that this is my meditation, or this is my presencing practice, or this is what I do to quiet the mind. And when we observe that even in the mundane small things in our lifetime, because what we're speaking to here is lifestyle choices. We've
Right.
been sold a lifestyle, and now we get to choose our own lifestyle. Because the truth is, the world is burning, the world is flooding. There are children being trafficked at higher rates than any time in human experience. There are more men killing themselves than any time in recorded history. There are more infertile men and women on the planet now. And we could focus on, oh, it's the system and it's the government and it's all these things. So many people are in that narrative, which only feeds into the collective fear and angst.
Yeah.
What each of us needs to decide is, can I alleviate that othering, that it's someone else? And how can I tend to my body right now? What can I do for my family today? Can I read a label on this bread and see how much sugar I'm putting into my child's belly today? Can I look at the products and I can't identify one word on the shampoo that I put in? And they sound like silly things, but the smallest pieces, because when I coach people, when I lead these events and practices, there can be an overwhelm with having to let go of everything that people
Mhm.
never start. So they
Yeah.
don't start to look at the first thing. And so, for example, people say, oh, okay, what can I do with food? I say, first step before you go on any diet or any cleanse, don't change anything. And this is metaphor for everything in life. Before you change anything, one needs a clear perspective on what even needs to change. And things are moving so fast that bringing awareness, focusing our attention for a moment. And the simple example is turn the package over and read the label. How many people read the label on their food? Who's ever listening to this? Ask yourself. Radical honesty. Nobody else is listening. What ingredients do you see on the packaging? And from there, the first piece is just bring awareness. Awareness is enough. Sometimes awareness can be enough just to see it, a child wound, a pattern, a way in which each of us have been dishonoring ourselves in relationships because we just don't want to be alone, or because we're feeding into what's expected of us. Isn't that wild, the paradox? We feed into what's expected of us on a system we don't even believe in the first place. And so in this, we get to radically choose how we move forth, or take responsibility that we're not choosing to change. And we can't tell anybody else it's their fault, because we live in a time where information is so accessible to us.
So accessible.
And so that simple piece of, can I bring awareness? Just like when I'm meditating, I'm in the Zen meditation. I'm not trying to not think about anything. My focus and intention is to watch. Can I observe? Detached from right or wrong or good or bad, until that moment comes of clarity. And I've sifted through the Rolodex and all my to-dos and lists. And it may take months or years to get to that point. And that's what's so daunting for people, is that deep down people know. I'm sitting around a fire up in northern Wisconsin when the highs are -10 about a month ago with my mother and father. And I'm building a fire for my chocolate lab Atlas, who I haven't seen in many moons, but he was turning 10. So I built an altar and a fire in the midwinter. And I place tobacco down in the fire. My parents come out. They're all bundled up. And I lay tobacco into a fire with my parents for the first time. They're around 70 years old. I walk in a lot of old ways now with elders and wisdom keepers. And I'm standing there introducing my parents of how to connect with spirit, laying a prayer down and amplifying the prayer. And then my father turns to me as I'm speaking stories of walking with Elder Mark and taking men into Sweat Lodge and all these pieces. And he looks at me and goes, "What makes an elder?" And it hit me so beautifully. It's not that my father doesn't know. It's not that you don't know, that I don't know. It's that we don't remember.
Mm.
We live in an age of the forgotten, where we've been taught to forget, which is why you meet a 0 to 6.5-year-old and they're still in that theta wave, and you see, and it's just sage. They're just sages, they're God, they look, their way they're speaking, and then they enter all of our systems of indoctrination. And yes, people need to be angry at the system and all those, but once we move through the anger and all of the pieces of guilt and shame, we get to clearly see that we have a choice. And so in this, whatever we've taken from this dialogue of ulcerative colitis, this methodology of how we bring ourselves into balance to get to baseline and then see what this existence is capable of through vitality begins with choice, taking radical responsibility for self, having the courage to let go of relationships, of things, of places, of people, remembering how to grieve, remembering how to mourn. We speak to Bryce and Tiff. They taught me and showed me to remember how to grieve. And then I could walk with death. Then I could let go of people I loved, because I knew I needed to continue on my path and journey. And then we bring balance, healing into thriving. It's time for our people to thrive. And so there are many other things I could share, yet with the story of ulcerative colitis, one doesn't have to have ulcerative colitis. They could have any other disease. They could have any other disharmony in their life. The piece is slowing down, bringing awareness, educating ourselves through experience rather than just being told, and thus choosing for ourselves.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. And yeah, I love the wrapping up of just, bringing it back to choice. It really makes me a couple of things that have come up listening to you a couple of times is that, you know, I feel like I also, well, I had a very what I call charmed childhood. Like I had a wonderful upbringing. I'm very close with my family, and I haven't struggled through a lot of things that you hear people talk about. And yet, I have gone on a big journey of like spiritual awakening and reconnection with spirit and with nature and all of that stuff. And I think that sometimes we tend to, like you were talking about with trauma, like we tend play to downplay if we
Mm,
don't have something, if we weren't abused as a physically abused as a child, or had something had sexual abuse or something big, then we downplay
mhm,
that we don't need that we don't need to heal. We downplay our our other experiences, and I think that has come up for me listening to you several times, is that I had to go through this process of like feeling like, oh, I'm going through these processes and people are like, why, what are you healing from? Like, why are
mm,
you had such a great childhood, you had like, what is your, and it's like some of it isn't about like the interaction with my mom and my dad, but it's societal healing from the things that you're just exposed to through the regular upbringing in our society. And the other thing that comes up for me, or that I think of when you talk about this, like it all comes back to choice, is our parents are doing the best that they can. Everybody is doing the best that they can with what they have. And while there's lots of things that I've come to where I'm like, oh, as a child, I was taught to suppress my tears instead of express them and things like that.
mhm,
One thing that my dad has always said that I think is just like really sage wisdom or sage advice, and very simple, is, Katie, if you don't like something, change it.
mhm,
And I have, it's so simple, but I have lived by that in so many different experiences where I'm like, oh, I don't like this. It's up to me to change it. And that is what you're saying, is that it's all about choice and
mhm,
remembering that that is there for all of us, whether it's in the smallest little way or a big way, depending on what circumstances you're in. But it
mhm.
all comes back to that choice. And so I love that. And thank you so much for tying that whole story together.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And the piece of change, isn't it so curious observing everyone up in arms? Change the world. What's happening halfway across the world? We got to make all this change. So distracted by all this external influence and harvesting of attention to distract us from the change that we have the ability to choose each day,
Right.
beginning with our mindset. And my my morning ritual. Somebody asked me the other day, Jamie, you travel a lot and you're all these places and at home. My morning ritual is non-negotiable. It may shorten, it may lengthen depending on what I have available in terms of how I allocate time and where my commitments are. Slowing down, opening my physical body, tapping into my breath, slowing down in meditation, bit of chanting. And I say these not that that's for each person to do, yet tapping into the breath, remembering who we are through breathing, that is the magic. That is the medicine that we have with us every moment that we have the privilege of living in this life.
Mhm.
So as we remember who we are, my mother used to share the juxtaposition of what we remember our parents saying. My father used to say, my way or the highway. The thing is, I chose the highway. It's been pretty wild. My mother would share every time she would depart, anything like that, to my sisters and I, make good choices. Remember who you are. And while I believe our connection with the movie The Lion King is where she remembered that phrase, I believe that my mother was imprinted with that phrase so that she would remember through that movie to share that passage with me for the rest of my life. So that ulcerative colitis, heartbreak, the world burning, lockdowns, and all these things, that these would all be nudges and roars and pushes from spirit to say, remember who you are. The closing to my prayer every morning, every time I check in with spirit, with myself, when nobody's watching, like the how you do anything is how you do everything. That's not the end of the prayer, but that's how each of us, to chop wood, carry water, I add shovel shit, because until you can chop wood, carry water, and it's romantic, but until you muck an animal pen, you really know what our cycles of life are like, or mamas and papas that are changing diapers. But the piece that I close with each of my prayer is, Spirit, may I be of service. May I be put to good use. The role of the artist is to create the revolution irresistible. At a time where our peoples are thirsty, hungry for truth, for people disassociated from their path of connection with spirit, people in that state will believe anything. They'll be led to any body of water they think is pure, even when they see it's murky. So the time now is for souls such as yourself, myself, your beloved, beautiful David, to be lighthouses for others, to courageously step forth and be willing to take the arrows of people saying you're wrong and shower them with grace and compassion, because it's not that they don't know, it's that they too have forgotten. I'm no different. I forgot for a very long time.
Right.
I was wrapped up in the same systems. I'm not holier than thou. And people sometimes are like, oh, Jamie, so easy for you. And so if people are really curious, and this is where everyone on this path of reclamation, be discerning. Am I explaining to other people, or am I sharing a story? Because the moment we start explaining ourselves is the moment we're out of harmony with our divine nature. We need not explain to anyone our choices. Now, if somebody's curious or it affects somebody else's life, yeah, there's responsibility that needs to be taken. But if somebody's curious, Jamie, easy for you to see me dancing and thriving and all these things. If you're curious about hearing some of the darkest nights of the soul, people call me Jamie Lightheart. And this came from the Brotherhood. And they checked me in one day because I was up to like 3 a.m. walking men to their tents at a Sacred Sons gathering on the coast. And I needed to take some self-care before our production meeting in the morning. When I got in there, they said, oh, we checked you in. I go, oh, what'd you check me in with? They go, oh, Lightheart. And they were, at that time, they were calling me Brother Lightheart. And I go, oh, why? They go, well, bro, because you can go to the depths of some dark, dark shit with these men. And you do it with a light heart. Like, isn't it great we're aware, though? And the truth is, Spirit has provided me. Some people are like, are you a therapist? You do these things? Hurt people hurt people. Disconnected people disconnect other people. These patterns repeat because we have societal wounding programming. And it's not just the West. The West made it all the way back to the East, and it's now global culture. It's not just the United States or just the UK. It's now everywhere. There's no continent untouched from this disconnection of self, of spirit, of land, of place. And as my dear brother Hunter shares, we live in a time of the orphaned archetype, where each of us feels that place everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. And when you disassociate people from their culture, from their heritage, from their song, from their hairdress, from the way they sing songs and make food, and replace that with something fabricated, that's how control is the pandemic that we live in. Yet we have a choice. And so in this age, I'm so grateful for you, Katie, for inviting me onto this, really celebrate you and gathering other people's stories. I believe the most important archetype in the world is the storyteller. And first, we each must listen to the stories we're telling ourselves in our mind and leading ourselves to believe. listen to others, and then begin to weave the stories of wisdom that can support others on the path to orientation of the heart and the mind. So thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for sharing. And before we go, if people are interested in, finding out more about you, do you have places that they can look?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So, a lot of people are like, Jamie, what do you do? And there's a lot of myriad of ways. Yeah, I produce in-person experiences. Most of them these days are for men connecting to the path of their heart, initiatory rites of passage. Sometimes they're with plant medicine. Sometimes they're with the land as medicine. Some are with elders. Some are with groups of brothers. Also in uh, orientation of the mind, heart activation, coaching. And then there's some really exciting projects coming up. Cacao is woven in as a steward and storyteller of cacao. And then I'll also be relocating right now to Truckee, California to open this biohacking temple with my brother. So all that to share. Instagram, which you can put in there, jamie.finnan, JAMIE.FINNAN. And I'm currently revamping my website, which will launch here in a few weeks, which has a lot of different offering services, newsletter. That is jamielightheart.com. And so those are the best ways to check in and then stay up to date on any offerings, in person and virtual gatherings too.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And so wonderful to hear your story. So wonderful to connect. And just thanks a lot.
Thank you.